this was done out of the goodness of the Giants' heart? Is that what this? Walk me through your reporting on this 1-year deal for Saquon. That's, I guess, 1 year for 10 point. I guess it's franchise tag plus, right? Like, since everything's a plus these days, franchise tag plus.
My understanding, Rich, was that on the Saturday night Zoom call with the top running backs, and you had Dalvin Cook on yesterday talking about what went down, the sense that was emanating during that conversation was that Saquon Barkley had resigned himself to the fact that he just needed to show up. The system is bad. Some point in time, you got to make a good decision based on a bad system and a bad situation. Now, Josh Jacobs, not inclined to show up anytime soon. Barkley, folks got the impression, was going to come in. And so anything he gets above the $10.1 million is a bonus if he was going to take the $10.1 million. I would have liked to think he could have gotten more than a $900,000 incentive package that requires 1,350 rushing yards, 65 catches, 11 touchdowns, and a playoff appearance to hit all 4 triggers and get the full money, or at least get, if I do all those things, I promise you won't tag me next year, but at least it's something over and above the 10.1 that he was due to make. And he's the first one in my recollection that was franchise tagged that actually got more money on that long-term deal after the on that 1-year deal, after the deadline for a long-term deal passed. A couple of guys in the past, Lance Briggs and Albert Haynesworth, got a promise that if they hit certain triggers, they wouldn't be tagged the next year. Barkley's the first one to potentially get more money, but he's going to have to do a lot to get more money.
So, what did happen? Why didn't the Giants and Saquon, best to your knowledge, get together for a long-term deal? What was the holdup?
What happened was back in the early part of the offseason, when the Giants had one franchise tag to use and 2 players on whom they were inclined to consider using it, Saquon Barkley and quarterback Daniel Jones. They tried to get Barkley signed to a long-term deal, and then they would have tagged Jones. When Barkley rejected the pre-tag offer, they pivoted to Jones and got a deal done with him and then tagged Saquon Barkley. Now, ideally, and I'm going to digress here for a second, but it just demonstrates one of the strategies that could be employed by running backs and other players in a situation like this. If they could get their agents to work together, what Jones and Barkley should have done was locked arms, Red Rover style, and said, we're not taking any long-term deal, neither of us. You're going to tag one of us, and the other one's hitting the market. But they didn't do that, and the Giants played one over the other, tried to sign Barkley and tag Jones, didn't work, tagged Barkley, signed Jones, and then pulled the offer that they had on the table for Barkley before they tagged him. And then I think a lot of the weeks and months after that were spent trying to get the Giants to put the offer back on the table that they had yanked before they tagged him.
And then what happened at the, midnight hour, the 12:01 on the day of the deadline from a couple Mondays ago?
Couldn't get it done. Bottom line, once the Giants pulled that offer that was on the table pre-tag, and my understanding is they made it clear, here's what's going to happen, here's what we're going to do. We don't want to have to tag you. We want to sign you to a long-term deal, and we want to tag Daniel Jones. When he forced them to go forward with the tag, that threw everything off kilter. There was an offer made during the offseason program that I believe was less than what was made pre-tag, and there was just this effort, I believe, based on everything I've heard, by Barkley and his representatives, and he had CAA involved kind of late in the process, and the CAA agent who was working with the Rock Nation agent wanted to reshuffle the deck and start over, and the Giants were like, no, we already have a negotiation that's been going on here. We're not going to go back to square one just because there's a new agent involved. So it was a lot of factors and moving parts, and they just couldn't get the deal done. And, what I had heard was the Giants were ready to pay $13 million a year and $26 million fully guaranteed over the first 2 years back pre-tag, and that's not an unreasonable offer. That's fair for what Barkley's done. I heard he wanted $16 a year. That's not unreasonable either. And I'd like to think that that's enough of a gap. It's small enough that they could have worked something out. So ultimately, end of the day, they didn't get it done, and now the Giants have Barkley under contract for a year, and they still have the ability to tag him next year if they want to keep him around at a 20% raise over whatever he ends up making this year.
The thing I just don't understand, Mike, is just the fact that, okay, so they're saving $9 million over the span of 3 years, and they get to hold the line on the franchise tag and also hold the line for running backs for the rest of the 31 teams in the NFL, and that is more important than paying your guy what he wants. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I understand that things are done in the NFL because they can be done. But if it really is just down to he wanted 16, they wanted to pay him 13, and they wouldn't meet at 14 and a half, and so they'll stick him with 10 and incentives to get up to 11. That's $3 million more bucks in the pocket for what? A linebacker that they might need? With you know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to wrap my arms around it, Mike. I just can't. Well, it's tough.
And the only way to wrap your arms around it is to accept the fact that football is very heavily driven by analytics, and this entire depression of the market for running backs. I asked somebody last week, what's gone on here? Why are we at this juncture in the existence of the NFL? And the response was blame analytics and blame Mike Shanahan. Because you go back to 1999, Terrell Davis tears an ACL, Orlando Scary comes in and has 1,100-plus yards over the balance of 1999. The next year, Mike Anderson has over 1,400 yards. That system where you plug anyone in and you can gain a lot of yards. Sean Payton started using a full complement of running backs. When they used the second overall pick on Reggie Bush, he didn't supplant Deuce McAllister. They split the touches, and then Pierre Thomas got sprinkled in once he arrived on the scene and showed he could get it done. And he was a guy who was either drafted very low or not at all. So that's the fundamental problem, and I think the teams are adhering to their very cold, objective, dispassionate assessment of what running backs can do, what other cheaper, younger running backs will do. And, you know, we've heard for years the NFL is what have you done for me lately. I think especially with running backs, but also the rest of the league, but particularly with running backs, it's not what have you done for me lately. It's what are you doing for me right now, and what do I think you're going to do for me tomorrow? And that's why the running backs are getting screwed here, and that's why the Giants weren't willing to say, well, this guy's put in 5 solid years. He's played through injury. He came back and had a great season. They have the rights under the franchise tag to squat on him at 10-1. And they did it, and they weren't willing to trade that in because they'll pay him 10-1 this year, and if they choose to tag him next year, they'll pay a 20% raise, and by that point, they're probably ready to move on to somebody else.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.